Medurstand. Understanding medicine.
Professor Aziz-ur-Rehman here. After doing a video on blood gases, I thought it is important to cover pulse oximetry also. Now, arterial blood gases was an established test ever since we were students, but this pulse oximetry came something recently, and it became popular during this COVID period, because everybody was talking about oxygen saturation, and this small device became the need of every household. Some basic concept: it could be a small handheld instrument like this one, a small gadget, a battery run, and it gives you two values. It can be applied to a finger, any finger, or ear lobules. It is best that finger is clean. If you wear nail polish, it could give you wrong value. If there are some stains or some pigment on the skin, that could also lead to wrong value. So it can be applied to any finger, and it could be applied to ear lobules also. It gives you two basic parameters. One is oxygen saturation. Now this is this parameter, percentage SpO2, is the amount of hemoglobin, the percentage of hemoglobin which is saturated with oxygen. Alright, so it does not give you the total amount of oxygen, and it also does not give you the dissolved form of oxygen, and it just tells you the oxygen, no other blood gas. And it also gives you the respiratory rate, and why it is important I'll explain to you shortly. Oximeter probe, the principle of this device is, this is called probe, and this probe emits two wavelength lights. One is red and the other one is infrared. This particular device, of course, you have the whole spectrum of lights, but here only two are important: red and infrared. Oxyhemoglobin, that means the hemoglobin which is bound with oxygen. Oxyhemoglobin and deoxygenated hemoglobin. Oxygen, let's call it oxygenated hemoglobin and deoxygenated hemoglobin. They have different absorption patterns. You know, whenever somebody receives light, it absorbs certain radiation and reflects back certain radiation. If something is red in color, that means it reflects back red waves. And if it is blue in color, that would mean it reflects back the light waves which are blue in color. Now, in this case, we know that oxygenated hemoglobin absorbs infrared and reflects back red waves, and unoxygenated hemoglobin absorbs red and reflect back infrared. So on that basis, because the instrument can measure, it actually has two parts. One part emits these radiation, the other side actually receives these radiation and can receive and can calculate what percentage of the radiation which were sent from here, the frequency of light which was sent from here, is received on the other side. So by measuring the relative proportion of both red and infrared, it calculates the amount of oxygenated hemoglobin. It also calculates the unoxygenated, but we are interested in oxygenated. And of course, if we have 100% normal, then whatever is oxygenated and the remaining is unoxygenated. Now, detector senses transmitter lights and calculates percentage of oxygenated hemoglobin. Data at peak of pulse is used. And now this may be emitting these light waves all the time. And in the finger, there is a blood which is present in the arteries, in the capillaries, in the vein, and some oxygen in the tissue. Which one will be measured by the instrument? They have configured it in a way that only the data which is taken during an arterial pulse that is used. So this device first detects the pulse, and the data of these lights at that time is used to calculate oxygenated hemoglobin, because that is predominantly arterial blood and that is what we are interested in. So this is the concept of arterial, the pulse oximetry. So it measures oxygen during an arterial pulse. Now this is relevant because partial pressure of oxygen, which is measured in millimeter of mercury, and that is done by arterial blood gases, and oxyhemoglobin percentage saturation, and that is measured by arterial blood gases as well as pulse oximetry. Now I'm going to give you the comparison. Now if somebody has got absolutely normal respiratory and cardiac function, no problem at all, oxygen partial pressure is close to 100 and saturation is also close to 100. So these two numbers, they match. Almost 100 matches with 99 or 100. I've seen people, I think it is hardly ever 100, it is usually 99, because after the blood passes through the lungs, there is some admixture of bronchial blood coming from the bronchi. So the partial pressure of oxygen and oxygen saturation is usually slightly less than 100. So this corresponds very well, but as the level drops, this one, you notice that oxygen partial pressure has dropped very significantly. It has come down from 100 to 70 millimeter mercury, which is significant drop, but partial pressure of oxygen, oxygen saturation has come down only from 100 to 92 or 93, right? So that is why I will explain later also, this pulse oximetry is not very sensitive to detect mild hypoxemia. Mild hypoxemia is best picked up by arterial blood gases. And here the change is only subtle. So somebody with pulse oximetry of 99 or 93, both are considered fairly well, but actual difference is, there's a significant difference. Now, since we are interested in monitoring oxygen saturation in one particular patient, so we use the base value and then we monitor it. And this one, look at this one. Partial pressure of oxygen has dropped so much. At 61 developed cyanosis. So from 100 to it has come less than 50, and either oxyhemoglobin percentage saturation is only 84, 82. So not that much. So that means we can't really trust pulse oximetry, and it can't be taken as a substitute of or alternative of proper arterial blood gases. But it is definitely very useful, because in a given person, if we know the baseline, somebody having a respiratory disorder, taking the example of COVID, before one develops pneumonia, his or her oxygen was say 95. Now if there is no further reduction on 95, then we are assured that there is no involvement of lungs. If there is reduction from the baseline, then we know that this patient is getting into problem. What is the clinical application? Anybody who has primary or secondary respiratory disorder, any respiratory disorder, it could be pneumonia, it could be asthma, it could be COPD, it could be another case of respiratory failure, anybody who is on ventilator, because it is continuous monitoring and non-invasive monitoring. So anybody who has any type of respiratory illness can monitor his oxygen. Patient may even keep it at home. Now let me give you the advantages and the limitation of this pulse oximetry. It is a non-invasive. The advantage is, as compared to arterial blood gases, it is non-invasive of measurement of arterial oxygen saturation measured as SpO2, right? And it can be considered as fifth vital sign, like heart rate, like temperature, like blood pressure, respiratory rate. This can be taken as fifth vital sign because it is very easy to measure. It is incredibly cheap and the device is only couple of bucks, and it is all it needs is just battery, so it's very cheap, very affordable. And you are interested in change over the baseline, for that it is quite efficient. Now you need to know the proper technique. I think once you apply this probe on the finger, allow a few seconds to a minute for the reading to settle down. Initially there may not be a proper contact, and there is typically this device takes few seconds to give you first reading, and then reading would change. So I think my advice to you would be to wait for a few seconds, and whatever stable values you get, and I think out of, if the values fluctuates between say 94 and 93, I would take the higher value, because there is no way that the value would increase by any technical issue. Maybe if the contact is not proper, it could give you the low value. So I think I would use the high value, but provided it is stable. Limitations: it is insensitive to mild hypoxemia. By showing you oxygen dissociation curve, I demonstrated that oxygen level can drop significantly. It can come to like from 100 to 70, whereas saturation will drop only from 100 to 92, 93. So mild hypoxemia can be missed. And then this is another limitation. It overestimates if there is presence of carbon monoxide or methemoglobin. In a certain situation, somebody is case of carbon monoxide poisoning, the saturation will tell you maybe 100%. In fact, saturation in carbon monoxide poisoning is likely to be more than normal healthy person, because carbon monoxide has got greater affinity for hemoglobin and it binds much tightly with hemoglobin, and methemoglobin can also be present in certain situations. Both methemoglobin and carboxyhemoglobin has the same pattern of absorption and emission of these wavelengths. So this device will read carbon monoxide related hemoglobin and methemoglobin as oxygenated hemoglobin. So you have to rule out these situations. It could be deceptive if there is any of these two. Does not measure oxygen contents. It just measure the percentage. So somebody who is grossly anemic, the total amount of oxygen, the total oxygen carrying capacity may be grossly compromised, but percentage of hemoglobin which is oxygenated may be normal. And it also does not measure the true ventilation, which is actually reflected by carbon dioxide. Now there may be a situation, somebody who is suffering from a respiratory disorder and you are giving him oxygen, or patient is on a ventilator, you may be having good values of this saturation, but carbon dioxide may be high. You don't know if the carbon dioxide is high on pulse oximetry. So that is another limitation. So the summary is that pulse oximetry is a cheap and non-invasive monitoring of oxygen saturation, but does not replace arterial blood gas. It is useful, you must use it, but you must understand the limitations. It does not replace oxygen. Limitations: it can miss mild hypoxemia. It can also miss what we call happy hypoxemic. Patient may have significant hypoxemia but may not have any symptoms. and it does not measure actual ventilation, and because it doesn't sense carbon dioxide, but it is great because, and it can also overestimate saturated hemoglobin with oxygen when there is methemoglobinemia or when there is carbon monoxide poisoning. Keeping all these limitations in mind, it is still a great tool because it is non-invasive, cheap, and what we are mostly interested in is the change over the baseline. For that, it is great. Thank you very much. This has been Professor Aziz-ur-Rehman from Medurstand. This was a short video and I hope it was useful. Looking forward to see you in my next video. Thank you.